Hello everyone, how are you all doing? Welcome to Easy Economics. How's the prep going along for paper 1? Well, today I've brought for you all May June 2023 paper 1, variant 12. Let's look at what this paper has for us. All right, MCQ number 1. What is part of the economic definition of scarcity? As soon as the word scarcity comes into your mind, what can you recall? Yes, that's a situation when there are not enough resources to satisfy everyone's wants, right? So now looking at the definition and looking at the options available, let's see which is the correct option. What is part of the economic definition of scarcity? High levels of taxation, low levels of investment, unequal distribution of income, or unlimited consumer wants. So easy, unlimited consumer wants. Option D. Remember, what did I tell you in my previous tutorial? That there were always going to be two options in each MCQ that you can easily eliminate. And then you will be left with the remaining two options, out of which you need to make a wise decision and decide which would be the correct answer. All right. So in this case, high levels of taxation, low levels of investment, unequal distribution of income, they are not at all part of the definition of scarcity. Scarcity has to do with wants and needs, wants and scarce resources. So it has to be unlimited consumer wants. All right. Let's look at MCQ 2. It talks about the PPC curve. It says a country's PPC has now shifted from PPC 1 to PPC 2. There's an outward shift towards the right. The outward shift towards the right, what does it suggest? Yes, the productive potential of the economy has risen. Economic growth. The economy is thriving, progressing. The productive potential has increased. What could cause this movement in the PPC? Now, they've given you three paths and they're asking you, out of these three things, which has, using these three things, you are going to tell what has caused the movement of the PPC to shift towards the right. Better education, higher investment, lower unemployment. So what would have happened to better education, higher investment, and the lower unemployment level that would have caused the shift of the PPC towards the right? Now you tell me, should there have been an increase or a decrease in the better education level? Better education levels would have yielded an outward shift of the PPC. So better education would have been true in this scenario, right? So this means A and B can be chopped off. Higher investment, exactly, yes. The investment level would have risen. That is why the PPC would have shifted. So this means, again, C option can be negated. Lower unemployment. Why would lower unemployment be false? Because, yes, if there would have been unemployed resources, then the economy would have been somewhere inside the PPC. And using those resources, the country would have reached the PPC then. But then the outward shift in the PPC is when there would be, if you're talking about the labor force, then it would not be because of the fall in the unemployment level. That would have been the increase in the size of the labor force, right? The shifts is because of either of the two reasons, or it could be maybe because of both of them. Either there has been an increase in the quality of the resources, or there have been an increase in the quantity of the resources. So either the shift outward occurs because there would have been an increase in the quantity of the resources or the quality of the resources combined together, right? That is why there would have been an increase in the labor force. That is why they say that there would have been that the lower unemployment, they have said under it false. Now you get my point? The lower unemployment would have been true in the case where there would have been underutilization of resources. In that case, there would have been a point inside the PPC, right? And then that would have led towards the PPC. You would have been somewhere over here and then you have moved on the PPC in that case, right? If they were talking about unemployed resources. That is why it's a false in this case. I hope it's clear now. So it's option D. For 2, it's D. All right. Let's look at the third one. The third one says a government spends $100 million on subsidizing wind farm construction instead of spending it on an increase in healthcare. So the government decides to spend $100 million on subsidizing wind farm construction instead of spending it on the provision of healthcare services. Which economic concept does this spending decision illustrate? Exactly, opportunity cost, right? So it's easy. It's going to say it has to be 3D. What was opportunity cost? The cost of the next best alternative foregone due to a particular choice made, right? So what was the choice made? Spending on the wind, spending on the subsidizing wind farm construction instead of healthcare. So there's an opportunity cost involved. The government has scarce resources. It has to have made a decision. Either it needs to go for subsidizing the construction of the wind farm or spending on healthcare. So if it decides to spend on wind farm construction, so it has to forego about spending on healthcare. Therefore, it involves an opportunity cost. Hope it's all clear. All right, the fourth one. What is an example of a macroeconomic indicator? Agriculture prices, average earnings in the secondary sector, real GDP, or total cost of German pharmaceutical firms? Exactly, the real GDP, right? We're talking about macroeconomic indicators, which show the progress of the entire economy, the macro. All right, so it's C in this case. The fifth one, good X is demanded in two areas, Y and Z. The table shows the amount of X demanded in these areas at different prices. Now, they have listed down the prices and they are yielding the amount of quantity demanded in both of these areas at all of these different prices. Now, let's look at the options available, and then looking at the options, we'll decide which is the correct one. All right. What can be concluded from the table? Consumers in area Y are more willing and able than consumers in area Z to buy good X. Yes, this is the definition of effective demand. What was effective demand? That the consumers are willing and able to buy goods at certain price levels, right? Let's look at the other options as well, then I'll come back to the A option, explaining you why it would be the correct one. B says consumers in area Y are richer than consumers in area Z. There's nothing in the table which suggests you that amount of the level that suggests that they are richer. Yes, you can look at the stats and they say area Y, the quantity demanded is more, but then the level that depicts that they are richer, that won't be. Option C says consumers in area Y want the good more than consumers in area Z. D says there are more consumers living in area Y than in area Z. Again, it can be chopped off because it doesn't say that, right? If they want, they must be back. It must be backed by the ability to pay. That is why they're demanding it, and that is why A is the correct answer. The want must be backed by the purchasing power. They are willing and they are also buying it, right? That is why A is the correct answer. Because at each price, area Y consumers are demanding and they're also willing to buy, right? So their demand is backed by the ability to pay for these prices, right? It's backed by their purchasing power as well. That's make an effective demand. All right, let's look at the sixth MCQ. Which price elasticity of demand would cause an increase in the total revenue if the price of the good increased? Now you tell me, if the price of a good is increasing, so what should be the scenario that should lead to an increase in the total revenue of the producers? The demand of the product should be elastic or it should be inelastic. If it would be elastic, a little change in the price, if it is rising, would bring around a drastic change in the quantity demanded. We all know if the demand is relatively elastic and if the price is increasing, even if the price is increasing by a little margin, the fall in the quantity demanded would be relatively larger than the increase in the price, right? So if the price is increasing, in no way would it be possible for the producers to increase their revenue. If the intention behind increasing the price is to increase the revenue in the situation where the demand for that product is price elastic, it won't work, right? So perfectly elastic and relatively elastic options can be easily chopped off. You've got my point? All right. If it is unitary elastic, so that means that the revenue would have remained the same. The increase in price, there would have been no increase or decrease in the revenue. It would have been the proportional change in the price would have been equal to the proportional change in the quantity demanded. So that relatively the revenue, the total revenue would have eventually remained the same. But if you want the total revenue to rise, so then in that scenario, the demand for the product has to be relatively inelastic. Yes? So the correct option would be C. All right. Let's look at the seventh one. The diagram shows the supply curve for coffee. The price of coffee has risen from P1 to P2. And you can see the quantity supplied has risen from Q1 to Q2. Then, how would this benefit firms in the coffee industry? A higher price gives firms the ability to increase profits. B, a higher price gives firms the incentive to reduce total fixed costs. Total fixed costs cannot be reduced. They have to remain the same. Nothing to do with the price. A higher price will encourage consumers to buy more coffee. You think the consumers are going to buy more coffee, but showing a supply curve. There's nothing to do with the demand curve. And even if you do not know anything about the demand, the scenario of the demand in this case, and at higher prices, the consumers won't be willing to buy more coffee. And it has nothing to do with the total revenue in this situation. It would increase the total revenue if the demand would have been falling due to increase in prices. So it's been chopped off. D says a higher price will encourage less firms to enter the market to supply coffee. It would have been the opposite. When the prices are rising, they encourage people to enter into the industry to make yield of higher profits. So again, D is also not the correct option. So we are left with A. A higher price gives firms the ability to increase profit. Higher the profit, higher the revenue, and they will be eventually leading towards higher profits. 7 has to be A. All right, let's move at the 8th one. What might be an external benefit of an increase in the number of university graduates in an economy? All right. What were external benefits? Can you recall what do we mean by external benefit? External benefits are enjoyed by those who are not involved in the consumption and the production activities of others directly, right? They are not involved in the consumption and the production activities directly, yet they are enjoying the benefits. So now they are saying if there is an increase in the number of university graduates, so what could be an external benefit? An increase in revenue for the universities from fee-paying students? No, this would be a private benefit to the universities. So this is not an external benefit. An increase in tax revenue from a more productive labor force? All right, let's see. 8C says an increase in graduate employment as a percentage of the working population. An increase in wages for graduates. Again, this is a personal benefit. C is also won't be the correct one. It has to be B. Why? Because an increase in the tax revenue from a more productive labor force. The government is enjoying it. Why? Once the labor force is going to be more productive, it is going to be able to earn more. So the government would have been able to get hold of more tax revenue by way of direct and indirect taxation. So the government is indirectly being benefited from increase in the number of university graduates. So this is an example of external benefit because the government is not directly involved in the provision of the university education, right? And neither it is benefiting directly. So it's being benefited indirectly. So the B is the correct option. Number 9, the price of a good increases. Now, what could cause this? What could be the reason behind the increase of the price of a good? What could cause it? The cost of the raw material falls. The cost of the raw material should have risen if the price of a good is increasing. So this cannot be the option. The incomes of consumer rise. If the incomes of consumer rise, What do you think should be? If the incomes of consumer is rising, the demand is increasing, and yes, too much money chasing too few goods. This could have been the reason why the demand, when the demand increases, the price of the good rises. Yes, B is the correct option. Let's look at C and D as well. The price of a complement and the price of a substitute falls. D says the price of a substitute falls. You think if the price of a substitute falls, the price of a good increases? No. If the price of a substitute falls, so in your good is also a substitute, so you also retaliate. Remember Pepsi Coke example I gave earlier? So this is also an incorrect option. C says the price of a complement rises. The price of a good has nothing to do with the price of a complement, and the price of a complement rising would not have been the reason behind the price of a good increasing, right? So B is the correct option. Incomes of the consumer is rising, which is because of the increased demand has led towards an increase in the price of that good. 9 has to be B. We've already marked that. I've explained you the logic behind it. We are solving the MCQs looking at by way of reasoning. We're not just marking the responses, marking the correct options just for the sake of marking it. We're doing it to make our concepts clear. This is what is my intention behind explaining you the reason. Otherwise, I can do it fairly quickly, but then it won't yield in the benefit I intend to pass on, right? Number 10. Imposing a maximum price for a good is an example of which type of government policy? Maximum price is what? You are imposing a price below the equilibrium price, right? So this is the maximum price, right? All right, so imposing a maximum price for a good is an example of which type of government policy? Regulation. Exactly, correct. 10 has to be C. That this is the maximum price that the government has established. You can't go beyond that price, right? All right, number 11. Savers suffer as inflation rises to 4.4%. Now, people who are saving are now in a bad situation because inflation has risen to 4.4%. Which function of money is most involved in this statement? So now they're saying which function of money is most involved in this statement. The first one they say is means of deferred payment. What does means of deferred payment? Which function of money? What do you mean by this function of money? That allows you to borrow and lend. B says medium of exchange. Medium of exchange means it allows you to buy and sell. C says store of value. Store of value says money can be saved. And D says unit of account, which means you can compare the worth of different goods, right? So it has to be C. Why? Because C talks about the function of money, where it tells you that yes, money can be saved. So it has to be C. Understood? All right. Number 12. Again, it's related to money as well. And again, it's talking about the functions of money. It says one of the functions of money is to act as a measure of value, right? So now measure of value can also be called as unit of account. Either you can say unit of account or either you can say measure of value. And what do you mean by this? That means you're comparing the worth of different goods, right? For example, I've got $100 and either I can buy 2 books or either I can go for purchasing a burger meal, for instance, right? So this is what you can understand by when we're talking about the function of money as a measure of value. So now they're asking, what does this mean? Money allows people to borrow and lend. If it is money is allowing people to borrow and lend, so what is this function of money? Means of deferred payment. B says money allows people to save their surplus income. This is store of value. If it says money is used to buy goods and services, this is medium of exchange. D says money is used to compare the worth of different goods and services. Yes, this is the measure of value. So now what is they given? They've defined each of the function and they're asking you which was the correct function in this scenario. Get it? So it has to be D when you are comparing the worth of different goods and services. All right. That's a measure of value or unit of account. It's the same thing. 13. Which trade union activity will be beneficial for firms? Now they are asking which trade union activity will be beneficial for the firm. Balloting for industrial action to prevent redundancies, campaigning to raise wages of trade union members. If they are campaigning to increase the wages, that would not be beneficial for firms. Firms would have to be paying higher. If they are putting in their votes, casting votes for industrial action to prevent redundancy, to prevent people from being laid off, again, it would be something against the firms, not in their favor. Instructing workers to strike over a safety dispute. If they are urging workers to protest over some safety issue, so again, it would not be in the interest of the firms. So again, it's not the correct option. D says providing training which raises the productivity of our workers. Yes, if the trade union is providing training, so in turn, it would be increasing the productivity of the workers. So it would be beneficial for the firm. The output level would rise. 13 would be D. Workers would be motivated. 14. What is not a variable cost of production? Cost of fuel, cost of raw materials, extra pay for working additional hours, rent of offices. All of these are variable cost of production because they tend to rise as with the level of output. Apart from rent of offices, as we all know, that's a fixed cost. So 14 has to be D. All right. 15. What is a definition of a firm's revenue? Money received from sales, sales volume, surplus over cost, tax payments. It cannot be C, it cannot be D. Sales volume, no. It has sales volume would only be talking about quantity. Money received from sales, right? P into Q. 15 is A. 16. What could cause internal diseconomies of scale for a firm? Now, before I solve this MCQ, come on, who's going to tell me what do you mean by internal diseconomies of scale? Internal diseconomies. Yes, internal diseconomies is when firms grow beyond a certain output, right? So what happens? Their average costs will rise. Their average cost of production rise. Why? Because they grow beyond a certain output level. So they're saying which could be the cause behind it. A fall in demand for the products produced by the firm. No, a falling demand would not be causing an increase in the internal diseconomies of scale, would not be contributing towards internal diseconomies of scale. It has something to do with the firm growing beyond a certain output level. See, now match the definition with the responses to arrive at the correct option. A merger with another firm that results in slower decision making. Yes, that's the correct answer. But then let's look at the remaining options as well. C says spending more on research and development to create new products. If the firm is spending more on R&Ds, so it would have caused economies of scale. It would have been an advantage for the firm, not a disadvantage. The lack of skilled labor in the geographical area where the firm is based. This is external diseconomies of scale. This is external diseconomies of scale, not internal diseconomies of scale. So you're left with B. Why? Because B is seeing a merger with another firm that results in slower decision making. And this is talking about management problems. So again, when the firm has grown beyond a certain output level, now it is giving rise or it is creating management problems. That is why B is the correct answer. So 16 has to be B. 17. What is the most likely reason to increase government subsidies? Why would government go for giving subsidies? Now it's talking something about merit goods. Remember what were merit goods? Merit goods are goods which the government considers that the consumers will not appreciate how beneficial they are, and so they will be under consuming it if the government decides to leave their provision on the market forces. For example, yes, education and healthcare, right? So why would the government decide to increase government subsidies? To decrease consumption of a merit good? Merit good, obviously not. To increase consumption of a merit good, yes. To decrease consumption of a demerit good, to increase consumption of a demerit good. Government won't want you to increase consumption of a demerit good. They would want to give subsidies to promote the consumption of subsidies, to promote the consumption of merit goods. That is why it would go for the provision of subsidies to increase the consumption of merit good. Right? All right. If it wants to decrease the consumption of a demerit good, it would go for taxes. Now you understand why it would be C? All right. So 18 has to be B. Do it the logical way. No matter how tricky the MCQs would be, you will always be arriving at the correct answer if you have your concepts clear. So always ensure that your concepts are clear. Just don't mark for the sake of marking the answers. Understand the reasoning behind it. Solve it with reasoning and you will always arrive at the correct answer. Inshallah. All right. Number 19. Which people are most likely to gain at a time of inflation? Now, if inflation is rising, so who are the people who will always be at an advantage? Who will always be the winners in this scenario? Companies who sell abroad, foreign tourists visiting the country. If the tourists are visiting the country, they would be suffering because it would have been too much inflation in the country, so they would have to be paying too much, right? The purchasing power would of their currency would have fallen then, right? Companies who sell abroad, if there's inflation in your country, so your exports would have been relatively expensive. So your export would have not been export competitive in that scenario. The price of your exports would have been risen, right? So you would not be able to compete better. So A and B can easily be chopped off, eliminate them. Those living on their savings, those who are reaping borrowed money. So those who are repaying borrowed money. Why? Because now inflation is increasing and they've already prior to those disinflation time, they've already decided the rates which they would be returning money, so they are in a better off scenario. All right, so 19 has to be D. 20. The government of a country Z announces an increase in spending on workplace training. What is the effect of this supply side policy likely to be? Now, what was supply side policy? Measures to increase aggregate supply. Measures to increase aggregate supply. Now, they're saying the government of a country Z announces an increase in spending on workplace training. So, if it has decided to spend on workplace training, what would be the effect? A decrease in country Z's employment rate. If the training is being provided, so the employment rate should increase. So, this is against it. Chop it off. A decrease in country Z's exchange rate. Why? If the training is being provided, so more output, more exports, export competitive goods, demand for goods should have increased. So the country's exchange rate should have appreciated and not depreciated and not fallen, not depreciated. So a decrease in the country's exchange rate should not have been the scenario in this case. An increase in country Z's economic growth rate. An increase in country Z's interest rate. It has nothing to do with interest rate. An increase in country Z's economic growth rate. When training is being provided, more output, hence more economic growth. So 20 has to be C. All right. 21. The table shows real GDP in US dollars billion for a country over a 3-year period. Year 1, year 2, year 3, and they've given the values for the real GDP in billion dollars. In year 1, it was 205. In year 2, it's 215. In the third year, it is now 219. Now, they're saying, what does the GDP data indicate for the country between year 1 and year 3? Now, if you look at year 1 and you look at year 2, the real GDP has risen by $10 billion. And the difference between year 2 and year 3, the real GDP has increased, but now it has increased by $4 billion. Right? All right. What does the GDP data indicate for the country between year 1 and year 3? Option A says a reduction in the rate of inflation. Now, we cannot say anything about the rate of inflation looking at this table. So, A cannot be the option. B says an increase in the rate of economic growth. Now, yes, there was economic growth. Why? Because the real GDP is increasing, but the rate is not increasing. Why? Because the difference between year 1 and year 2, the real GDP rose by $10 billion. But in between year 2 and year 3, the real GDP rose, but by $4 billion. So although there are signs that yes, the real GDP is increasing, which means that economic growth, there are signs of economic growth, but yet the rate is not increasing. See, right? It's not increasing by the same rate. Had it been increasing, then again it would also have risen by $10 billion between the difference would have been between year 2 and year 3. But no, the difference is only of $4 billion. So it's not an increase in the rate of the economic growth. The existence of economic growth, yes, there are signs of existence of economic growth. The existence of economic growth per capita, there is no information given to you about the population, so you cannot say about per capita, right? So it cannot be D in this case. So it has to be C. Now you understand why it's C? All right, let's look at 22. What is a likely consequence of a falling level of unemployment? Now, unemployment level is decreasing. So what would happen because of a falling level of unemployment? Downward pressure on wage rates. If unemployment is decreasing, so the pressure on wage rates should have been increasing. So you chop option A. It's the opposite. Option A is incorrect. B, increase in welfare benefit payments. If the level of unemployment is decreasing, so the government would have been paying less in welfare benefit. So B is incorrect. Rise in absolute poverty. If the level of unemployment is decreasing, so absolute poverty should have fallen. Why? Because absolute poverty is when people do not have enough income to pay for the basic needs. But now the level of unemployment is decreasing. More people are being employed. So absolute poverty should have fallen. C is incorrect. Rise in income tax revenue. Yes, D is the correct answer because when more people are going to be employed and the level of unemployment is going to fall, people are going to earn more and there would be an increase in the income tax revenue. So 22 has to be D. All right. 23. 23 says the diagram shows Italy's unemployment rate and GDP per head. When do Italy's employment rate and GDP per head rise at the same time? Now, Italy's employment rate and Italy's GDP per head both have to rise at the same time. Now, they're given you the periods. A says between 2000 and 2001. If you look at Italy's unemployment rate between 2000 and 2001, so the GDP per head is increasing, but the unemployment rate is falling. So A cannot be the option. D says 2000 and 2015. If it's 2000 and between 2000 and 2015, so the Italy's unemployment rate is increasing between 2000 and unemployment rate 2000 and 2015. Again, it's and we are talking about Italy's GDP per head. Again, it's falling. So this cannot be the option between 2009 and 2010. In 2009 and 2010, Italy's GDP per head is falling. So you need to match both the scenarios, Italy's unemployment rate and GDP per head. So you are left with only 2007 and 2008. And yes, you can see this is 2007 and 2008. Italy's unemployment rate is also increasing. And between 2007 and 2008, Italy's GDP per head is also rising. So B is the correct answer. For 23, it's B. 24. 24 says during a recession, many people in a city become unemployed.